Where is it?
At the Mizrahi building on Caroline South, King Georgia.
אז בגלל שהטלפון קטן, אז כאילו תנסה להשתדל לעמוד מול זה שהמצלמה תראה אותך
זה כבר התחיל? אז כשעשיתי את זה, זה כבר היה. אוקיי, בסדר. Okay. Okay, so if everyone can, we can start because it's already a 1:45. I don't know, the people who are watching on Zoom have been patiently waiting for us as we try to solve the problems of the country and of the world. I don't know, maybe on a metaphysical level, if it's a good enough shear, we'll try. So we're going to focus today. This is, as you know, it's a 4-part series that we're going to be focusing on different aspects of Hilchot Pesach. Last week we spoke about the question of Korban Pesach and whether you could bring a Korban Pesach today and what the issues are involved, etc. I'm going to move today from the Pesach to the matzah and the maror, right? As the pasuk speaks about al matzot umarorim yochluhu, that you should be eating the Pesach with matzot and with maror, and so to look at these mitzvot a little bit more in depth, to understand what we're doing Leil HaSeder, specifically with this I want to start with an introduction. The introduction really is, I think, a very important one, a very basic one, which we don't necessarily think about too often. And it's on a pasuk that we're all familiar with, because it's a pasuk that features prominently in the Haggadah. Here at the beginning, V'higata levincha bayom ahu lemor, ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeiti mimitzrayim. And I see right now, just to let people know, it's my fault because I put together the sheet. The database that I must have taken this from uses Shem Hashem, and I didn't transfer it, so this really requires Geniza. It has the subsequent sources from a different database doesn't have Shem Hashem, but this one did have Shem Hashem, and I didn't catch it. I apologize. However, that pasuk, right? How do you understand that pasuk? Right? I mean, it's even the irony. Well, it's the pasuk that we give to the Rasha, right? Li v'lo lo ilu haya sham lo haya nigal. Right? That's the pasuk. But if I look at this pasuk here, and I say, okay, what does it mean? V'higata levincha bayom ahu lemor. You'll tell your son, whether whichever son he is, and you tell him, ba'avur zeh. Well, you translate it for me. What would you say? Ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeiti mimitzrayim. No difficult words. What does it mean?
Because of this, God made a miracle for me and my reality.
Because of what?
This.
What's this? This. Okay. So presumably, right? Most of us, I think, will understand the two perushim. The first perush is the perush which is the Ibn Janach, the great grammarian, right, who is also known by his Latin name Marinos. So he said the following: Ba'avur zeh, Amar Rabbi Marinos, perush ba'avur zeh, haroi ra'ui lihiyoto hefech zeh. Really, the pasuk is meant to be understood in an inverse way, namely, ba'avur she'asa Hashem li, because God did this to me, namely taking me out of Egypt, or because the son is asking why, right? Why are you doing this? And my answer is because God did this for me, namely took me out of Egypt, right? That's why we're having the Seder tonight. Right? That's how we understand it. Right? That's certainly the way I always understood it growing up. right? But on the most basic level, the reason why we're eating matzah, we're eating maror, right? We still have time, Bezrat Hashem, to be eating Korban Pesach. Why are we doing it? Because God took us out of Egypt. This is what we're celebrating tonight at the Seder. And he brought other examples of this kind of grammatical inverse, because it doesn't really work with the pasuk. It says, because of this, God took me out. Right? It's not saying because I'm doing this because God took me out. It's saying the opposite. So the Ibn Ezra says, I'm not going to go through all the examples now, but none of them are correct. And his understanding of those psukim as well as this pasuk is totally mistaken. How can we, it's beautiful play, how can we take the words of the living God and flip them and say, it's not because of this that that God took me out, but rather because God took me out, we're doing this, right? You're turning things on their head, right? V'tama pasuk hefech machshavta. No, the actual understanding of the pasuk is just the opposite of what he said. Ki einanu ochlim matzot ba'avur zeh. We're not eating the matzot because God took us out of Egypt. Rak perush ba'avur zeh ba'avur zot ha'avodah shehi achilat matzah v'lo ye'achal chametz. The reason why God took us out of Egypt was so that we will eat matzah and not eat chametz. Shehu tchilat hamitzvot, because these are the very first mitzvot that we have. Shetzivalanu Hashem. Asalanu Hashem otot ad sheotzianu mimitzrayim. In other words, if you ask the more basic question, why did God take us out of Egypt? God took us out of Egypt, and he told Moshe, right, the Siman is that you will come and worship me on this mountain. When he talks to them at the time with the bush. But the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim is so that we become the Jewish people who have the Torah and have the mitzvot. So he says, read the pasuk literally. The rationale for this is that ba'avur zeh, because of this, because of what we're doing tonight at the Seder. That's why Asa Hashem li b'tzeiti Mitzrayim. That's why he took us out. He took us out because we are now created a new dynamic, this new dynamic of a nation keeping Torah mitzvot, with everything that's incorporated in Torah mitzvot. That's the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That's why we're here. Right? That's the reason why everything happens. And it's a really take a look at Rashi. Rashi says it not quite as explicitly, but he also says on the same pasuk. Was this is basically when I saw this Ibn Ezra, it was a paradigm shift for me. It really changes things in a significant manner. The reason when we take a look at the mitzvot, so now it's not just a question of, okay, I'm eating matzah because God took us out of Egypt and the bread didn't rise and whatever, etc. All of that, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Yeah. But it's the meaning behind the mitzvah take on a completely different level. In other words, you're saying this is the whole purpose of the historical development of Am Yisrael and perhaps by extension of the entire world, because we are still playing out this role some 3,300 years or so after Yetziat Mitzrayim, of everyone who is proud of being a Jew, whatever that means to them in terms of from an ideological perspective. So they'll be happy to say, and they will say, we want to be an Or L'Goyim. Right? We want to change the world, whatever our ideology is at the moment. You could argue, is that Judaism? Is that not Judaism? My question. But whatever I view my Judaism as, that's what I'm doing. So here, that has started at the very beginning, and that's why we're going about these mitzvot. So it gives a very different cast to the notion of the mitzvot themselves. And I don't think that it's a an accident that he picks specifically matzah and maror as being those psukim, as a promo for the shir. He knew that I was going to talk about matzah and maror. That's why I wanted to talk about it. But these are debating together with Korban Pesach. These are the beginning of the Jewish identity. Yeah.
It's like you know had he not taken this out, we would not have been able to serve out.
Right.
This is,
Exactly the point. In other words, and now you can understand what, if I could just elaborate on what I think Jacques started trying to say, is that basically it's almost a ludicrous line that we say in the Haggadah, right? If God hadn't taken us out, right? We all would have been servants of Paro. Exactly where's Paro? Right? Where is where is Egyptian culture at this point? 3,300 years later. Okay, so we would have been one of the nations or ethnic groups of Egypt, and the rest, as they say, is history. Right? It is history. Fine. And however history would have developed had there not been a Jewish people. Okay, some people might have been happier. However, so what does it mean? So the answer means that we would have been caught in that value system, right? So it wouldn't be Paro. So now it would be, I don't know, Putin. Right? Whatever the value system, however it would have developed, it would have been this human system, and it would not have been the divine system, and it would not have been the fact that we've been a chosen people with a spiritual mission that needs to be implemented. So that is exactly the point. Yeah.
So he's saying is the reason we were taken out of Egypt was because we were willing to eat matzah. We were willing to observe the commandment of eating matzah.
And if you have a cardboard enough like matzah, right? So say just that. I'm willing to eat this. That's a good reason to come out of Egypt. Right. But that's basically what it's saying. Yeah. Obviously not in terms of that I'm willing to do this, but a
paradigm of all of time.
Right, and we can talk about it as we have spoken about in the past in terms of shiurim about the ta'amei mitzvot, the rationale behind mitzvot, and then you can talk about, okay, what is the rationale behind mitzvot? Is it a sense of each particular mitzvah having its own reason and rationale and something that I can apply to the larger picture? Is it a more basic sense of discipline and accepting God's dominion upon me, and that in itself is something which is valuable? We can start talking about the details, but yeah, it's because I'm willing to eat the matzah, right? And even if it is that cardboard. Okay, so now let's talk about different understandings of what we're actually doing at the Seder, because I think that we can talk about, with regard to matzah specifically, with a little bit of a pivot with regard to maror. But with regard to matzah, I think you can trace at least 4 different themes with every bite. Okay, so let's take a look at it. The first basic theme, taking a look at the psukim, and I haven't forgotten what Harold hadn't brought up last week in terms of the interplay between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach L'Dorot, right? The Pesach of, as was observed that first Pesach, and how it applies and what changes occurred afterwards. And I'm working on it. I'm hoping that one of the, I still have 2 shiurim left in the series, that one of the shiurim will deal with that. We'll see. However, let's take a look at these psukim. The psukim, right, and they're not all of them. This is also what we're going to be reading this Shabbat. It's Parshat HaChodesh. And so as part of Parshat HaChodesh, I do my best to connect what we're doing to what we're reading this Shabbat. That ba'achlu et basar b'layla hazeh tzli'eshu matzot al meroim yochlu. So after a description of Kiddush HaChodesh and of taking the lamb and of sprinkling the blood and all of that, so the Torah tells us, it's already the 8th pasuk of the parak, that that you shall eat the meat broiled, roasted, together with matzot and merorim, together with matzot and bitter herbs. And this is how you're supposed to eat it. So you shall eat this in haste, right? And just the standard translations, right? This is one of the things which everyone agrees is different from Pesach Mitzrayim to Pesach Dorot. Namely, that, as you know, some of you might be familiar with the custom of people going around the Seder table with something on their back, etc. But that's a nice custom, but it's not a halacha that you have to have walking shoes and a walking stick, and that you have to eat it quickly. Just the opposite, right? We eat it leaning back, right? We don't eat it b'chipazon, as though we're about to, we're grazing, as it were. Getting every time someone in the family eats standing up at the kitchen, taking out, off the counter, taking the refrigerator, they see my wife visibly bristle, right? So that would be the way we should be eating b'chipazah. We should all be in the kitchen, right? Taking from the fridge and eating something quickly, right? That's hardly the way, that's not our Seder experience, right? But what? With the 9 minutes of eating the shiur, it can be difficult. It can be difficult, okay. There you go, especially as the kazetim get bigger and bigger, these giant olives that people are carrying along. Okay, fine, that's true. This day is going to be a, and the question isn't totally clear which day, by the way. Is the day which is the zikaron, is it the 14th, the day that you sacrifice the korban? Because that's what we just spoke about. Or is it going to be the subsequent days? Because the very next pasuk is Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu. 7 days you're going to eat matzot, right? We've just, by the way, you don't even think about the pivot, but there's been a pivot, because here in pasuk Chet it was Al Matzot U'Merorim Yachluhu, and now it's Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu, right? You're eating matzot for 7 days, no Pesach, no Maror, right? You're eating the matzah. Is that the same theme, extended? Is it a different theme? Right? This is a So that's one possibility. That's certainly true. In other words, it's not clear, right? And again, if I do speak about this, I'll deal with this more in depth. Who pasuk Yudalid, right? You don't see Yud Ben and Gimel here, but in pasuk Yudalid, is that being told to the Jewish people before? No, it's the Rosh Chodesh, and they're being told on the 10th, take the sheep, and then slaughter it on the 14th, and this is what you're supposed to do, right? And now I have a Hayom Azal Zikaron v'Chagotem Otocha. You're going to remember. Is that also in the, in the instruction manual for that first Pesach, or is this something which is told to Moshe that will occur? Right, but the Jews only are told the first 13 psukim, and in the 14th pasuk, which is Pesach Dorot, that's something which is, we're going to say this is how Jews will always commemorate what you're doing tonight. But you don't need to know that yet. You'll know that, next year. But right now, this is enough for you. So it's not totally clear, and you also have to compare it to Perek Yud Gimel, which isn't here at all, which is also seems to be perhaps after Hayom Anachnu Yotzim, we've been leaving now. So this is after perhaps the Korban Pesach was sacrificed, and trying to figure out exactly what was told to whom when isn't such a simple thing. But you're absolutely right. It could be that this is there. There are those, though, who could say that if this is what is being told to the Jews, so then already in Mitzrayim, they know that there's a 7-day holiday. Perhaps they're not keeping it yet, but it is a 7-day holiday. And this is also part of, I keep giving the promos, but the this is a question: was there an Isser Chametz on the first day or week of Pesach in that first year? It's one of my kids roll their eyes. They've heard it so many times. One of my favorite jokes about Pesach is, what's the biggest miracle of Pesach? Right? Biggest miracle of Pesach is that there were, just based on the numbers given to us in the Torah, 600,000 Jewish mothers. Right? Because if there's 600,000 Jewish men of the age of 20, so presumably there's 600,000 Jewish women of the same age. 600,000 Jewish mothers. Nobody packs a sandwich. Right? We're going out and, the dough hasn't risen yet. What do you're leaving when you can't pack something, something we're having, it's crazy, right? What's going on? So one possibility, there are different ways you can answer, but one of the possibilities is that it's not that they didn't have the foresight, they couldn't have chametz, right? They already knew they couldn't have chametz. Then why did they have dough on their shoulders? That's not, your standard packing item. You don't have to go through security check at the back. If you imagine every airport, we would, we have to check your dough for explosives. What's going on? Like, why are they carrying dough? Right? So the answer is because they were making matzah. They were planning they couldn't have chametz, so they planned on baking right away, and now they're leaving, so it bakes on their shoulders. Right? It wasn't that they hadn't prepared, and it could very well be perhaps based on these psukim, because you have already later on the that's the pasuk lametet. Yehuda batzek asher yotzu mitzrayim ugot matzot kilo chametz. Right? They begged it because it wasn't chametz. Ki gorshu mitzrayim v'lo yochlu lihitmameya. They couldn't pack it and bake it, so it's being baked right then and there. And there's an Isser chametz. Of course, why should there be an Isser chametz? But there's an Isser chametz, and the matzah, the history, if you will, along the lines of what we said in terms of the Ibn Ezra, the history begins to fit the legal mitzvot of what you have. Right, so that could be what's going on. So now, so that's one set of psukim. Number two, we have another set of psukim, right, which is a very different set of psukim, and that is in Parshat Re'eh in Sefer Dvarim. V'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem Elokecha tzonu bakar b'makom asher yivchar Hashem l'shaken shemo sham. So here now the Torah itself is telling us that you're supposed to slaughter it. And this gets back to what we were talking about last week. Again, notice that the Torah itself is saying we're not going to view this as a mitzvah only in the household, the way it was in Mitzrayim. It's a mitzvah of bringing the korban l'makom asher yivchar Hashem. That has to be what is done. And now, what happens there? Lo tochal alav chametz shivat yamim, tochal alav matzot, lechem oni. So now we've had these different themes. We've had the theme of Korban Pesach. We've had the theme of the Lo Yachlu Lihitmameya. They couldn't delay. They couldn't tarry. Ki b'chipazon, again the haste, which is a factor in the matzot. And we now have a new term that's being introduced. It's introduced in Sefer Dvarim, the lechem oni, right? The bread of affliction, we'll say, right? That's the Maxwell House Haggadah translation. So that's so we have three different themes that are found in the Torah. Now, how do these themes play themselves out halachically in the Seder? Now, that's what I'd like to take a look at while we go on. And we're going to bring a fourth theme in for the sake of fun. So now, we'll skip number 3. Let's go to the Mishnah number 4. Okay, the Mishnah says, and it's a Mishnah that we're all familiar with, but we'll see in a minute that we're not quite as familiar with it as we think. The Mishnah says the following: Rabban Gamliel haya omer. Rabban Gamliel would say, Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu bepesach lo yatsa yedei chavata. If you don't say these 3 things on Pesach, at the Seder, you have not fulfilled your requirement. Which requirement? Mishnah doesn't say. We'll talk about that in a minute. Not in a minute, in about 10 minutes. We'll get to it. But leave that aside for the moment. And what are they? Elohen, Pesach, Matzah, Umaror. Right? We're all familiar with it, I hope, because it's coming from it's quoted in the Haggadah, the end of Magid. Okay, but the last line is a little different. Pesach al shum shepasach makom al batei avoteinu b'Mitzrayim. Pesach, because God passed over, whatever the word Pesach means, different cheer, whatever happened, God passed over our forefathers' homes in Egypt. Fine. Matzah. So the line in the Mishnah is different than the line in the Haggadah. In the Mishnah, it just says, Al shum shenigalu avoteinu. Why do we eat matzah? Because our forefathers were redeemed from Egypt. If you want to just compare quickly, you'll see numbers, again, a mistake on my part in terms of the collating this. I don't know why the word processor didn't pick this up, but be that as it may, the second number 8 on your sheet. Okay, the one with the underline. Right, Haggadah shel Pesach. Matzah zu shanochlu mashima al shum shelo hispeak b'tzeikam shel avotenu lachmitz ad shenigla alei melech b'chei hamlachim hakadosh baruch hu ga'ala. Right, so it's a different text. Right? We're taking the Mishnah. The rest of the Mishnah is basically the same, and the Haggadah. Why is this different? Right? Why is this Mishnah different than all other Mishnah? Okay, why is this happening? Right? Why couldn't we just simply say Al-Shum? So the answer, I think, is because, and we'll see the Netziv says this, is that this is a different theme. First we talk about the Al-Shum Shepasach HaMakom Al Batei Avoteinu b'Mitzrayim, and that continues into the Geula. Whereas the matzah here is being presented as being an extension, a continuation of the Korban Pesach. When I eat the matzah, certainly when there was a Korban Pesach, so the matzah is part of the meal. It's part of the Pesach experience. We'll say it's part of the Korban. Many Korbanot have bread attached to them as being brought. Most prominently, a Korban Todah, right? The Thanksgiving offering, which is ironically we don't say Mizmor LeTodah on Pesach because it has chametz in it, right? It's the only Korban with that's brought by an individual with chametz. But the fact that you have bread that's part of what you're supposed to eat the Korban with. And so similarly, you're supposed to eat the matzah, the Korban, with the Korban Pesach, with the bread. Since we don't have the chametz, it's just matzah. But you're supposed to eat it with the bread. Okay? That is that part. Now, in other words, viewing matzah as being an extension and a supplement to the Korban. That's one aspect of it. That's the Mishnah. We'll talk about in a moment why it's not the Haggadah. But this idea of the matzah now has ramifications. Matzah as part of the Korban has halachic ramifications. So here we have an interesting machloket. Machloket between the Rishonim in Ashkenaz, about what we are familiar with Ein Maftirin Achar HaPesach Afikoman, or to use the lashon of the Gemara, one gear says Ein Maftirin Achar Matzah Afikoman. So what is this idea? So the Rashbam in his Perush, so he says the following. Why do we eat what we call the afikoman, safun? Why do we have the afikoman? Why we ate matzah at the beginning of the meal? why do we have to eat another piece of matzah at the end of the meal? So he says, Zecher l'matzah hane'echelet im haPesach b'kricha. The reason why we're eating it is not for the korban, zecher l'korban. It's zecher for the matzah that was eaten with the korban. V'zohi matzah habitzua shanu ochlim ba'achrona l'shem chova. Very important. I don't know why I didn't put it in bold. That, which is the matzah with the capital mem? Which is the matzah where you're mekayim the mitzvah of achilat matzah? So he says, you know which one you're mekayim with? The afikomen. That is the mitzvah of matzah. Va'al korchenu anu mevarchin al achilat matzah berishona afal pi she'ena l'shem chova. We have to say, you said, what do you mean? I made the bracha at the beginning of the meal. Right? Al achilat matzah. That's when I've been eating my matzah. So he says, but that's because you can't make a bracha after you've already done something. Right? You start eating the matzah at the beginning of the meal, but the real matzah is the afikomen matzah. By the way, this is the source of the minhag of some people have of eating two kezetim at the afikomen. One zecher the Pesach, and one zecher the matzah with the Pesach, because you're being mekayim that mitzvah of achilat matzah. There's a similar halachic idea at Rosh Hashanah, by the way. Rosh Hashanah, as we all know, we blow the shofar before Musaf, and that's when we'll make the bracha lishma kol shofar. What is the core mitzvah of Tkiyat Shofar? The core mitzvah of Tkiyat Shofar is during Musaf, the Tkiyot Mumadim. They, for whatever the reason, now's not the time, there was a later takana to blow the shofar before Musaf. But the real Kiyum HaMitzvah is during Musaf, together with Tefillah. You make the bracha as soon as you do it, because you can't make a bracha after you've already done a mitzvah act. But in terms of the conceptually, the mitzvah is being mekuyam at the later point. So that's what he's saying. You'll eat your matzah, you'll have your chicken soup, you'll have your eggs in salt water, you'll have all of the courses, but everything that you'll eat is a lead up to the mitzvah achilat matzah at the afikoman. That's the shita of the Rashba. The Rosh, about 100 or so years after the Rashba, he disagrees. And he says, Hilkachni really, the ota matzah ain't l'shem chova. He gives different proofs as why he disagrees with the Rashbam. He quotes the Shita, but he says, I do disagree. No. Ela ochla ota zecher lePesach. Was the reason why we're eating the afikoman, he says, is not because it's zecher lematzah hade'echelet im haPesach, but zecher lePesach atzmo. Shaya nechal al asova ba'achrona ulefi shu zecher lePesach yesh la din Pesach shelo le'echol achareh. Okay, we treat it as a zecher. So the Rosh, which is the more commonly known idea in terms of the reason for the afikoman. So he's saying, okay, I have to use a substitute for the Pesach, so I picked the matzah. So I'm already telling you something that even on that level of a zikaron, the idea of the matzah being part of the Pesach is important. We don't say, okay, zecher the Pesach, we'll eat I don't know, a piece of land. Could have said that, right? You want to make sure it's not the Korban Pesach, so make sure that you cook it and don't broil it. I don't know. Or eat a broiled food, which isn't meat, right? There are all sorts of things that we could have done. We gave a zecher l'machatzit shekel, right? What did we give as zecher l'machatzit shekel? Cold cash. But we said zecher. It's only a zecher. Okay, so we could have said the same thing for the afikoman at the end. The fact that they chose matzah as a zecher is telling you, well, that because the matzah is part and parcel of the korban pesach, and it's not just a zecher. This idea, another halacha, which we're familiar with, which also stems from the same idea. This is source number 7. Don't know what that Y1 is. I have to clean up this document. So he accepts the rush, right? He just said, the reason why I'm eating it, it's not because of Zecher Matzah, but I'm eating Zecher Pesach. You eat it leaning and you don't make a bracha. So you should be careful to eat it before chatzot. Okay? Why? Why chatzot? Because the korban pesach had to be in before chatzot, and this is the idea. So there is the machloket tanaim. I didn't bring all of it here on the sheet, but there's machloket tanaim between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah as to whether you should be eating your korban pesach and finishing it by chatzot or not. Rabbi Akiva says no. He says that the whole idea is because you're supposed to eat it b'chipazon, and the chipazon is when they actually left, so you could eat it until the morning. Right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says no, the chipazon is the chipazon of the Egyptians when they started pushing us out, and that happened at Chatzot when the Bechorim died. So that's why we have to finish it. If they were eating their korban, the chipazon was when the Egyptians started knocking on the door and said, "Get out already, get out!" Right? So that is up to Chatzot. Lahalacha, right? So the different people have different minhagim, right? I'm not telling anyone what they should do. Some people are trying to finish by chatzot. Some people try to finish, do not have that. That's not exactly part of this shir, but it's such a great story. I can't resist. So when at the Lichtenstein Seder, right? And I know people who were at the Seder. So when it happened, so Rav Lichtenstein had always tried to finish by chatzot. And when he had young children, it wasn't much of a problem. They had a relatively quick Seder and they were able to, but as the children got older and the discussions became more involved, etc., so there was 1 year, and it was I think 2 years before I attended a Seder at Lichtenstein. But a good friend of mine was at the Seder when it happened. So Rav Lichtenstein looked at his watch after the soup had been served and said, "Oh, I guess we have to go straight to the Afikoman because it's almost Chatzot." And Mrs. Lichtenstein, Shetibadel Chaim Arukim. So Mrs. Lichtenstein said, "Oh no, I've been in the kitchen all day long preparing a meal. We're not skipping the meal, right?" And so Rav Lichtenstein, at the time, he had to go to a neighbor because he didn't want any of the children to be part of the Beit Din, but he had the guests and brought in a neighbor from a side, made a Beit Din on the spot, and he did Hatarat Nidarim, right? So that to allow to eat the Afikoman after Chatzot, at the meal after Chatzot.
Story I heard is that she said Tuesday.
Right. Yes. It was that. I skipped that line because that line was I said, my father was also a very religious man, right? And he always ate after Chatzot. Okay. That's the line. You're right. That's the line. When I asked Moshe Lichtenstein about this many years later, whether this was true, if the story had happened, so he affirmed the story. He left out that line. I'm sorry. When is Chatzot? Chatzot is the whenever but the halachic midnight. So right now, it will be come Pesach time around 12:30, 12:40 in that range at night. right? You can just pull out, don't pull it out at the Seder, but you can pull out your phone and then look at your app and know exactly what it is. But that's the right. So this is part and parcel of the fact that we're looking at the matzah as being part of the Korban Pesach. In other words, if the Korban Pesach wasn't with us anymore, it isn't, right? This is, hopefully it will be, but it's, until last year it hasn't. So why should I care about this? In other words, okay, so those people who continue in eating, they're in hug is because they're following Rabbi Akiva's opinion. That's why also Shulchan Aruch didn't say you can't eat. He said, yeah, Zahir, you should. Right? There's a different discussion. I don't want to get into all the details because I won't get to everything else in the show. But why is it a factor at all today? So the answer to this factor is that the Korban Pesach and the matzah as being an element of the Korban Pesach still plays a very strong role in our Seder, even to the extent of the Rashbam, who takes it the furthest, saying that the matzah that we eat at the end of the meal, at the afikoman, that's the real matzah, because that's the matzah that would be eaten with the Korban Pesach. So even though there's no Korban Pesach, there still is musaf with the Tkiyat Shofar, right? There is no Korban Pesach, and we're still saying the matzah is that matzah. So that's the idea of the first theme, if you will, of the matzah as being a part and parcel of the Korban Pesach. But as I said, we don't say that. Why don't we say that? Why, when we say matzah zu al shumma, why do we have a different text? So here, this is based on, well, we'll start with a Gemara, which will also help us with the Maror side. The Gemara says the following. This is the number 8 without the underline. Amarava, matzah bisman hazed deoraita umaror derabana. When we eat our matzah, we're being mekayim mitzvah deoraita. When we eat the maror, we are only being mekayim mitzvah derabana. We're not being mekayim mitzvah deoraita. Why not? Umaishna. Why is it different? Dichtiv maror dichtiv amatzot umarim bisman deika pesach yesh maror bisman deleka pesach leka maror. Maror is just the charif, as it were. We can think of the Hillel sandwich, especially if it was a soft matzah, which was sort of like a lafa. So basically, it was shwama, right? That's what he had, right? He had a lafa, put in the lamb, and a little charif, right? That's the maror, right? That's what they're eating. So the maror is just being eaten together with the Pesach. You don't have bezbanta leka Pesach. You don't have a korban Pesach like a maror. You don't have the maror. There's no chiyuv anymore. Matzah nami. So then it's matzot u'marorim yochluhu. So matzah should also be a drabanan by that logic. So Gemara says no. Haktiv al matzot u'marorim. That's the question. Matzah mihader hader bekra. No. When it comes to the matzah, the Torah goes back and adds a new pasuk. Ba'erev tochlu matzot. Eat in this evening, and this is the original, right? Back in Parak Yud Bet, right? The ba'erev tochlu matzot. You should be eating the matzah. Did I put that pasuk there? I didn't put the pasuk there. But that you have the chiyuv to eat matzot. Ba'erev tochlu matzot. So you should be eating, in other words, without mentioning the Korban Pesach. Matzah is mentioned independently of the Korban Pesach. Right? So that is the idea. However, Rav Acha bar Yaakov Abar, so Rav Acha bar Yaakov disagrees and says, Echad zeh ve'echad zeh d'Rabbanan. When we eat matzah, when we eat maror, they're so tied into the Korban Pesach. Without the Korban Pesach, they're only d'Rabbanans. Why? So what about the pasuk that Rava brought? The Gemara answers, so basically, what happens if you, back in the day, are not in Yerushalayim for whatever the reason? You can't bring your Korban Pesach. You're going to bring it on Pesach Sheni. or you're tameh, and you can't bring a korban pesach, and you're going to bring it in Pesach Sheni. So, do you just have a regular meal? You don't commemorate Pesach at all? No. Then there's a mitzvah d'oraita, tochlu matzot. Eat matzah. In other words, the idea of the matzah, what he's saying is that when there's a Pesach being brought, so the matzah has d'oraita strength. Because I'm part of Am Yisrael, they're bringing the korban Pesach. I can't bring a korban Pesach because of a technicality, but I'm still eating the matzah that's connected to the korban Pesach, even if I am 500 miles away. It doesn't matter. Okay, that's the idea. That's Erev Tochlu Matzot. However, so then the Gemara continues. Rava, what would Rava respond to that? Rava Amar Lach, Tamei v'shaya b'derech rechoka lo tzarich kra. No, that's obvious that they don't need a pasuk. Delo gore me'arel uben nechar. There are people who are not able to bring a korban pesach. Right? The arel person, for whatever the reason, a hemophiliac, he was unable to have a brit milah. So he cannot bring a korban pesach because he's an arel, he's uncircumcised. But nevertheless, the pasuk had said, "Kol arel lo yochal bo eno ochel, avo ochel b'matzah umaror." Because the arel can't eat it, but the korban pesach, but an arel nevertheless will eat matzah and maror. Okay, that's the idea that and that's understood. And if that's understood, so certainly someone who just is temporarily unavailable to bring the korban pesach because he's tamei or because he's not in Yerushalayim, so that person is going to also, by extension, have a chiyuv of matzah maror, and that leaves that other pasuk of ba'erev tochlu matzot available for korban when there is no korban pesach at all. That's the way the Rabbi says.
Isn't it the wrong day?
What?
Isn't it the wrong day?
Why?
It should be the 14th.
This is on the 14th.
No, it's
This is also part of the previous discussion I didn't mention, but I'm glad you mentioned it, is that the korban is brought on the 14th, but it's eaten when? On the night of the 15th. Right? This follows the pattern of the Beit HaMikdash. Whereas when we are all familiar with the way that dates work in the Jewish calendar, right? They start at night and they continue into the day. In the Beit HaMikdash, it's just the opposite. Beit HaMikdash, all the service was done during the daytime. You can't bring a korban at night. All the service is being done, and the night that follows is an extension of the day. Right. So, but now in terms of the date, it's a new date, but it is the same day of the avoda. Okay, so that's also why, for example, on Ma'ariv, right, the Ma'ariv represents the limbs and the fats of the previous day's korbanot that are now being brought onto the mizbeach because we have to clear the deck, as it were, for tomorrow's avoda. Right, so that's why that it's not a specific korban. That from Erev, it's just the extension of the previous day. That's why it's Rishut. But this is this is what's going on. So Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot, so it's on the one hand, from the Korban perspective, it's the extension of the previous. But if now what does Rava mean by Erev Tochlu Matzot as an independent idea? Is it still the same matzah? But it's still the matzah of the Korban, but there's no Korban. But you say, okay, but the Torah said eat matzah anyway. So the Torah is saying eat matzah of the korban? No, maybe not. Maybe now it becomes matzah of the 15th, not matzah of the 14th. It's not the matzah, if you will, of Chag HaPesach being the 14th, but rather it's matzah of Chag HaMatzot. Shivat Yamim Tochlu Matzot.
So the real matzah is really at the beginning when we make the motzi and halchilas matzah.
According to that, or they're both,
to that.
or they both are right.
Not the
Right, but it could be that they both, it could be from thematically. If I'm looking at it as matzah as part of the afikoma. If, on the other hand, it's matzah of the achilat matzah independent, then it's the beginning, right? So, and they both could be right. In other words, you could be eating two, right? You're, with the different bites, you're being mekayim different, not different mitzvot, but different rationales for the mitzvah. What is the separate rationale for matzah? Now let's take a look at what we actually say in the Haggadah. So we don't say al shum shenig alu, but we say al shum shelo hispik b'tzeikam shel avoteinu lachmitz ad shenigla aleihem melech malchei melachim hakadosh baruch hu uge'alam. When didn't their dough rise? The next morning, on the 15th. Right? Basically, what we're saying with this line is that when we're eating the matzah today, right, at our Seder, we're not eating it, we'll say only. We're not, or even entirely. If we were only eating it as part of the matzah of the Pesach, so then it would only be d'Rabbanan. But we're eating it because it has an independent status. The independent status is the symbol of the flight to freedom. Shelo yachlu hitmameya. It has symbolically a different theme. It's a different motif. It's not just the seasoning to the korban. Maror remains the seasoning of the korban. But the matzah has this different theme representing the flight to freedom. And that is what we are celebrating as well. It could be that when the Jews ate their matzah the first night, they didn't have that because they hadn't gone through the next part of the process. But we, their descendants, are commemorating both aspects. And that's the independent matzah. Could be that if you were to ask Rava, is it two separate mitzvot? Maybe not, but you have at the Seder with the Korban, you are being mekayim two different aspects with every bite of matzah that you're eating. You're eating the matzah of the Pesach, and you're also eating the matzah of the freedom.
The Haggadah doesn't say that.
Right. So today in our Haggadah, it's Rabbi Gamliel, when he said his statement, was before the Korban. Right? That's Rabbi Gamliel Haggadah who said it. So, or if it was Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne, so we already saw that Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne last week might have brought a Korban Pesach himself. But be that as it may, that's part of Korban Pesach. That's why it's Al Shum Shenigalu. But we, hundreds of years when the Haggadah is being set up, hundreds of years later when that formulation is being stated, they don't take that. They take the theme of Shelo Yachlu Lehitmamea, because that's why we are eating the matzah, certainly on the D'Oraita level. The Netziv says this. This is not just my idea, but this is the Netziv. The Netziv in number 9 in this parish to that pasuk of in Dvarim that we read before, Tochal olav matzot lechamoni. So he says the bizman Pesach haya ikar zikaron shel yitziat Mitzrayim b'nes the Pesach Hashem al petach va'achilat matzah haya rak lahodia shegal Hashem otanu. Right, and that's why. And he brings the pasuk v'lo nizkar inyan chipazon klal. I'm just going straight to the bold. Elahu kemo lachmei todah shemevi'in al hanes. The reason why we're eating the bread is because it's like the bread of a korban todah. Aval bizman hazeh achilat matzah b'layla rishona bal lamdenu inyan chipazon v'inyan sha'anu omrim matzah zu shaduch l'mshumash lo ispik b'tzeikam shel avotenu lahachmitz v'kvar tamu b'zeh al shinui milishon Mishnah. The people have asked why we're not using the lashon of the Mishnah. U'zvareinu muvar yafeu mikra malehu b'achilat matzah bizman hazeh v'yesh la'askir hatam ki chipazon yatzanu mitzrayim. So today we're eating the matzah from that second reason. We're eating it primarily not as the lachmei todah, not as part of the Pesach, but rather as an independent idea. This right? What? No, midoraita. Midoraita. This is the Torah itself is saying when you eat your matzah with the korban, you have two themes. And when you eat the korban, the matzah without the korban, you still have the second theme. So it could be that the first theme is only Drabanan, and maybe, the Rashbam goes to say that even today it's a Doraita, maybe. But, most people don't disagree with the Rashbam and go say that it's Drabanan. But or Zeicher. But the second theme, we follow the Shita of Rava, that it's Doraita. Yeah.
But the pasuk says be'erev tochlu matzah. In other words, the independent mitzvah of matzah is eating it ba'erev,
right?
Not the next morning when it became
right
from dough to matzah.
Correct.
So isn't that a contradiction?
It's not exactly a contradiction. In other words, again, what's the chipazon? If the chipazon is the chipazon of the Egyptians, right?
Yeah.
So then it's the chipazon. It was when we said keep the chipazon yatzatem in Mitzrayim. So the chipazon, when does that begin? It will culminate with lo yachlu lit mameya, and the batsek will not rise and all of that. But it begins already in the evening, right? It could be that even, and I would say, if I'm speaking as the legislator now, right? Legislator with a capital L, the legislator, God. So now, if I could speak on his behalf, it could be that even though the mitzvah is tomorrow, so I could have another mitzvah. You're right. Could have, you have to make kiddush on matzah, and that's the mitzvah. Could have had that, right? We have other mitzvahs which are during the day. I don't know, lulav and etrog. Sukkah is at night. Lulav and etrog is only during the day. Okay, fine. Could have done that. But I could also say, since we're focusing on a meal and we're focusing on a korban, and we now know what is the, what people are going to be doing, to have another achilah the following day as a mitzvah, it's sufficient to have one achilah here at the Seder with different themes attached. But there's a third theme. I don't even know if I'm going to reach the Morah. I have 15 minutes left. So now so let's get to the third thing. Halach ma'anya. That's how we're going to begin our magid, right? That's the first thing that we're going to say when we actually get down. We've washed our hands, we've had our vegetable, whatever it is, and when we've broken our matzah, and now we start the magid, right? How do we start magid? Halach ma'anya. We don't talk about the matzah of the korban, and we don't talk about the matzah of lo yachlu lihit mameya. We talk about, this is the bread of affliction, right? To make sure that when did they eat it in Egypt, right? Presumably as slaves, right? This is what they ate. And now, you can talk about how, and perhaps this is why chametz is chametz, because it was the Egyptians who actually invented or discovered the idea of leavening, right? But the slaves didn't have that kind of sophistication. They ate matzah all the time, right? So this is simple pita, basically. So this is the bread that we used to eat. Kol dichvin yetei, right? So whoever is poor, come and eat. Right? A lot to be said about halach ma'anya. That is not the time. However, I will say, right, that when was this piece written? Most likely. Right? Whether it's Bavel or Eretz Yisrael, I don't know. But Bavel would make sense. But in Eretz Yisrael, the primary language was also Aramaic. But it's almost definitely being written after the Churban. Right? We're in the later stage, and we're basically saying, right, that we are all, to a certain extent today, slaves. Right? We are under Roman domination, or whoever whatever rule is bad, right? And that's why we're going to end it. Right? But the Hashata Avde, The Shana Haba b'nei Chorin, right? So we're saying that this is what we are, but even though this now has the lechem oni aspect is taking a different kind of perspective for the Jew in the free Jew, time of the Beit HaMikdash. So for that Jew, the lechem oni, there's an irony that's involved. Right? This is why it's being perhaps introduced only in Sefer Devarim. The Jew looking back 40 years later, hearing this about his fathers, the very same bread, which was a symbol of slavery, is our symbol of freedom. Right? The very same, the irony that's there when I'm eating, right? I call it lechem oni, but eat it, the bread of affliction. Why? Because you left. It's become geula. Now, when I don't have a mikdash, and worse than I don't have a mikdash, I don't have independence, and I am an eved, hashata avde. So what am I going to say? I'm going to look at it as lechem oni, but at the same time, I'm voicing my freedom. How do I voice my freedom in that very same paragraph? By inviting other people. Right? This is something Rav Soloveitchik points out. A poor person, or not a poor person, a slave can't invite anyone because he doesn't own anything. Right? The very fact that I invite someone else into my Seder, so I'm making a statement that I am a Ben Chorin, no matter what the circumstances are. That's the statement that's being made. But the focus here is on lechem oni. So how does that play out, or does it play out halacha l'maaseh? So the answer is it does. If we continue, we now continue to number 11. It says, Amar Rav Papa, Hakol Modim is the Gemara in Brachot. The Gemara is talking about the halachot of Lechem Mishnah on Shabbat and on Yom Tov. And Rav Papa says, Hakol Modim bePesach shemeniach prusa betoch shleima uvotzeah. Everyone agrees that on Pesach, I take 2 full matzot, and I break one. Why? And I place the broken piece, or the slice, literally, with the matzah, with the hole, and I make the bracha, and I literally cut the bread. My timer, lechem oni ktiv. Rashi explains, Avkan beprusa levarech al achilat matzot. Well, Rashi doesn't explain. The idea being that even though normally I have 2 full loaves, so now, an ani doesn't eat a full loaf. He doesn't have a full loaf. He only has a slice of bread. So that is being represented by the broken matzah. Okay, now here there's a machloket between Rashi on the one hand and the Rambam on the other. And 2 different minhagim. Also, both of these minhagim were played out in the Lichtenstein Seder. How many matzot do we have? 3. That's Rashi. Because how does Rashi understand the Gemara? He says, okay, Rav Papa says, normally speaking, we have 2 loaves. On Pesach, we have an additional theme. The additional theme is lechem oni. So I take my lechem Mishnah, and I add the prusa. So I start with 3. I break it. That's the yachatz. By the way, the Rambam says yachatz doesn't happen when we do yachatz. Rambam says the yachatz happens right before I eat. Right before I have the matzah, I break one, and then I make the bracha. We'll get back to our minhag in a minute. But the idea is I have my lechem mishnah, and I also add a prusa. That's why we have 3 matzot, and that's why we make the bracha on 2.5. 2 for lechem mishnah, and half for lechem oni.
The other half is
right?
someone.
And the other one is left for the afikoman. Correct. However, the Rambam, take a look at the source number 13 here. You take 2 loves, not 3. and you break one of them, umeniach parus l'toch shalem, and you make your bracha on 1.5. Umevarecha motzi lechem min haaretz. Umipnei ma eno mevarech hashtei kikaro k'shar yamim tovim mishum shenemar lechem on. The Rambam, it's and the Gra says the Rambam, if you think about it, makes more sense, because lechem oni, according to the Rambam, is I am detracting from what I normally do. Normally, I have lechem mishnah, 2 whole loaves. Today it's lechem oni, so I only have a loaf and a half. Right? That's where from what we do is actually we add. We say not only do we have lechem mishnah, we also have lechem oni. Okay. Now you can. Okay, so we know who has won, if you will, in the halacha l'maaseh, right? Everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but the overwhelming majority of Jews have 3 matzot. That's why the Shulchan Aruch, Paskins, etc. Sfardim, Ashkenazim, briskers follow the Rambam. Okay, and I assume the Gra did as well because it said the Gra. And that's why at the Lichtenstein Seder, so Lichtenstein had 3 matzot because that was his minhag coming from his family. Mrs. Lichtenstein had 2 matzot, right? Because her father had always had 2 matzot, so she had 2 matzot, and she and broke 1, and she had 1.5. I don't know what the next generation did. I haven't checked that out, but that is the but the Soloveitchiks, Rav Chaim, the Briskers, they follow the Rambam in this regard. But basically, what you're saying is that this extra theme impacts on the halachic performance. Okay, that's the idea that I want to say. So you have aspects of our mitzvah which are stemming from the matzot u'merim yachluhu. You have aspects of our performance which are stemming from ki b'chipazon yatzatim mitzrayim, and you're having other aspects which are stemming from this idea of lechem oni. So those are the 3 in the Torah, but there's a 4th. The 4th is the drasha that's given by Chazal for lechem oni. So number 14, the Gemara says the following: Amar Shmuel, lechem oni ktiv. What is the idea? Lechem sha'onin alav dvarim harbe in some nuscha. Tanya nami hachi lechem oni lechem sha'onim alav dvarim harbe. So this is the drasha that's being used. Obviously, on a pshat level, it means the bread of affliction, right? But I guess on a different pshat level, from a Jewish perspective, right? So it's the bread of talking, right? Because what good Jewish meal is not going to have a lot of conversation, right? But it's also the onin specifically of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're using the bread as part of our storytelling. And so this drasha level, right? Because it's certainly not pshat, but this idea of this midrash impacts on the way that we have the Haggadah as well. Let's start at the next line, because now I'm going to get back to the question that I raised before. Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach, right? Lo yatsa yedei chovato. Right? You didn't fulfill your the command. Which obligation are we talking about? So here there are 2 possibilities. The Rambam explains in the following way. Number 15. Kol mi shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu belel 15 lo yatsa yedei chovato v'dvarim ha'elu kulan hen hanikrain Haggadah. In other words, what the Rambam says is that if I don't explain if I don't use this as the prop, if you will, I haven't totally fulfilled my mitzvah of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. In order to talk about Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, I have to not only tell the story about the Exodus, I also have to discuss the mitzvot that I'm doing tonight and explain their significance. And using and pointing to it, right? We don't point to the Pesach, right? Because it's not the Pesach. But the matzah and the maror zeh al shum shem miru. this idea is basically saying it's a multimedia presentation. I'm using the matzot, I'm using the maror as props to tell the sipur. It's not just simply lechem sha'onin alav, that I say, I happen to be telling Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim when the bread is there. I'm using the bread, I'm using the matzah to tell the story. That's the way the Rambam understands it. And you haven't fulfilled Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim totally if you don't use it. That's what Rabban Gamliel said. If you just look at the mitzvot of the day as separate mitzvot and a fourth mitzvah being Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, so then you miss the point. The matzot are part of the story. That, of course, goes back to the Ibn Ezra that we started the shir with, in terms of saying, well, why are we doing this? Why did God take us out? In order for us to do the mitzvot, in order for us to have an appreciation for why we're doing the mitzvot. Right? That's the whole idea. The Ramban takes it at one step further, but you'll see what I mean. It's like it's a wild Ramban. Ramban, it's a different discussion. We have 2 minutes left. Ki yotzeh ba shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu bepesach lo yotzeh yidei chavato. So this is a discussion in a different halachic area entirely. Won't get into it right now. But what does he say here? He uses our idea, the Rabban Gamliel, as his example for the following: Below sheyet tzarich lachzor v'le'echol pesach matzah u'maror. What do you mean lo yatsa? You didn't fulfill. That means you didn't fulfill it. You weren't mekayim the mitzvah. So he says, don't take it too literally. It doesn't mean it literally that you weren't yotzei. It just means that you weren't yotzei to its best possible way. And I'll prove this idea because you think that you didn't mekayim mitzvah v'achilat matzah if you didn't say kol shalom amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach. You think you didn't fulfill mitzvah Pesach if you didn't talk about it? You didn't fulfill the mitzvah of maror if you didn't talk about it? Of course you fulfilled the mitzvah, right? Had kavanah, kayem mitzvah matzah. But you didn't fulfill it in its best possible way. The Ramban just flipped the Rambam on his head, right? The Rambam had said, which mitzvah didn't you kayem? Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Ramban says, which mitzvah didn't you fulfill? Matzah. In other words, if you don't speak about it, if you don't explain why you're doing it, then you haven't really fulfilled totally. I mean, you've been kind of the mitzvah d'oraita, but you haven't fulfilled in its fullest sense the matzah. The matzah has to have the sipur component of it, otherwise it's not complete. If you only have, if you will, or if you only eat your matzah and you don't talk about it as being part of Korban Pesach, and you don't talk about it as being part of lo yachlu lihit mamei achipazon, and if you don't talk about it as lechem oni, and even if you don't talk about it as just simply being part of the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, so then your matzah is deficient. Then it's not just that it tastes like cardboard, it is cardboard, right? Well, it's cardboard that you're becoming a mitzvah with the cardboard, right? But it's not matzah in its fullest sense. And so here, because I just gave an hour, 15-minute shir, so I told you should be talking about 4 different themes. I don't know if you have to talk about all 4 different themes, but you have to talk about, right, why you're eating the matzah in order to, and we do it right before we eat, right? It's at the end of Magid, right? It's at the end of Magid, and right before we eat, we say, why are we going to be doing these mitzvot? To be mekayem, right? To understand that these mitzvot are part of what we just have been saying, along with when do we eat, right? So part of that Magid saying when do we eat, that's also saying why we are eating what we are going to eat. Okay, well, we didn't get up tomorrow, maybe next week we'll talk about it. Okay.
Actually, Rabban Gamliel, after the Korban, and he was not included among the guys in Bnei Brak because they were still doing Korban Pesach. But he said that you didn't have to do Korban Pesach, and that's what Shelo Amar.